Welcome to the entire Bible for everybody, from atheists to Christian believers. This is Session 7, Old Testament Prophets. My name is Pastor Richard Mathisen, and here are the assigned readings for Session number 7, Old Testament Prophets. Good evening.
Good evening.
Welcome to the entire Bible for everybody, from atheists to Christian believers, Session number 7, Old Testament Writing Prophets. That word writing is brand new, but I became aware just this past week the fact that they were writing is extremely important for reasons I will be talking about. But, in other words, these are the prophets that wrote books, the three: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the 12. So, that's me, and November 13th. The course is based on a theory of what modern people want to know, the message, which are the assigned readings, and explained in modern language, including science. What is true? And it's an overview that we did, and then 8 sections, 4 in the New Testament, 4 in the Old. Each has assigned readings and a lecture. And here's where we're at now. We're number 7 Old Testament prophets. So we have 2 more to go, the Second Temple and then the entire summary. Why is the Old Testament so important? Because it's about monotheism, morality, and prophecy about a coming Messiah. The 3 M's, I might call it. And we did an overview that placed the Bible on a timeline of civilization from the invention of writing, 3000 to 1000, which is Israel, and 0, which is the birth of Jesus, and then up to today. So in the history of civilization, the BC is before Jesus, the AD is after, BC and AD. And that's that 1000 BC there, when this nation-state of Israel was formed, and that's a good historical date. So there's a progression in religion from total polytheism to monotheism in Israel, and then ultimately to religious freedom. Polytheism started 3000 BC. At the beginning of civilization. Monotheism came in Israel at 1000. And that's polytheism, the Greek gods. And 95% of human history was very religious. And the last 5% has had the ability of freedom, the possibility of secularism or even atheism, which is why I'm addressing this to atheists as well as Christian believers. The start of monotheism was huge, and it happened in ancient Israel. In session 1, we showed the tremendous growth of Christianity from the time of Jesus by centuries, and it was from 0 to 8,000, 150 to 25 million, and then today there's 2.38 billion Christians, and I also gave you Judaism. Judaism may be small, but these are the 5 world religions, and both Christianity and Islam are closely related to Judaism. They all recognize Abraham as father, Abraham, and they're called Abrahamic religions. Okay, so Jesus was the most influential person in the history of the entire world, for better or for worse. And because of Jesus, the Bible has been the most influential book in the history of the world, for better or for worse. And today, we're looking at the Old Testament writing prophets, and the word writing is important for reasons. And that's where we are in our schedule. And the Old Testament is about monotheism, morality, and prophecy about a coming Messiah. Judaism deserves high praise from Christians for its message about monotheism, morality, and the Messiah, because they prepared the way for Jesus. They're very important. And ancient Judaism solved the 2 biggest challenges, monotheism and morality, and laid the groundwork for understanding of the Messiah. The Judaism and Christianity agree about monotheism and morality. They have different ideas about the Messiah. Christian believers believe the Messiah has come. His name was Jesus. Jewish believers think the Messiah has not yet come and still wait for his coming. But both of them expect a resurrection of the dead at the end of time. So ancient Judaism solved the two biggest challenges, monotheism and morality. And the most important historical date in the Old Testament is the nation-state of ancient Israel, 1000 BC. Very convenient date because it's easy to remember. And there's King David. Now, why is it so important? Because it's a solid historical date and a solid historical person, the king, the start of the David dynasty. And almost everything in the Bible before 1000 BC is uncorroborated, according to modern biblical archaeology. But almost everything from 1000 on, at least to 532, is historically corroborated. Doesn't mean everything is correct, but the timeline of kings and prophets and historical facts in the world of that time is very much accurate. So we'll look at Judaism, the Old Testament divided into 4 time periods: prehistoric Judaism from creation to 1000, and then monarchy Judaism, which is what we're at now. Monarchy Judaism, the kings, the monarchs, from 1000 to 532, from King David to Cyrus, and that also happens to be the time of the prophets. So that monarchy period is also the time of the writing prophets. Although the monarchy starts at 1000 to 532, the writing prophets, this is becoming very important, the writing prophets do not start till 750. And the interesting question is, well, why do they start writing at that point? And we're going to see why. So in terms of corroboration of Judaism's history, the prehistoric has very little corroboration, but the part we're dealing with, 1000 to 532, has good corroboration. Now, Israel's monarchy, the kings were a sad story. It started so good, King David, King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and then it split in 930, and we wound up with 2 separate kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and both of them are going downhill. That's why I call it a sad story. And here is the unified monarchy of David and Solomon from 1000 to 930. The northern kingdom lasts from 930 to 730, actually 722, until the Neo-Assyrians capture it and wipe it off the map. But the southern kingdom goes longer, from 930 all the way to 586, and then the Babylonians capture it and take the leadership of all Israel, of all the southern kingdom, into Babylonian exile. So if we look just at the unified monarchy, that time, that is considered a good period according to the Bible. In fact, they perhaps somewhat exaggerate how wonderful it was under King David and King Solomon. It wasn't perhaps as large as they would hope to make it out to be, but there was a unified monarchy. We had Prophet Samuel as a young boy with the priest Eli, and then anointing David as king of Israel. That's another anointing. David was just a young man when he was anointed. And there's King David of Israel. Now, of course, here's Prophet Nathan accusing King David of adultery with Bathsheba. Thou art the man. And there's King Solomon, the son of David. At King Solomon's temple, he built the first temple, and this is very, very important. The first temple is hugely important. We'll be talking about the first temple in Jerusalem repeatedly. And then, after the Babylonians conquer the southern kingdom and the temple is destroyed, when Cyrus the Great returns the Jews from Babylonian exile, they will build the second temple. So there's King Solomon's temple, the first temple. But then the kingdom of Israel splits. According to the Bible, this is bad. And here you can see the northern kingdom in the blue, the kingdom of Israel, and then the southern kingdom in the yellowish, kingdom of Judah. And what's really important is to notice that Jerusalem is here. That was the capital of the unified kingdom, but when they split, Jerusalem is in the southern kingdom and not the northern kingdom. And the reason that's important, we'll soon. Basically, the northern kingdom is not going to send people to Jerusalem to worship, which is what they're supposed to do, right? If all worship is supposed to be in Jerusalem, the northern kingdom is violating the law, so to speak. That becomes an argument that the northern kingdom was being bad. And we'll get to that. So, the northern kingdom actually contains 10 of the 12 tribes. The southern kingdom of Judah has 2 tribes. A small tribe of Benjamin and a large tribe of Judah. The Jerusalem, the temple, is in the southern kingdom. Map of ancient Israel after 930 is that. Prophets are the same time period. It's a sad story. And where does morality come from in the Old Testament? It comes from the writing prophets. That is, here I'm going to, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are called the 3 majors, and the 12 minors: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. And they are a mouthful. But those are the 15 writing prophets. There is actually one more called Daniel, and he's actually considered major, but he's from a whole different time period that we're going to talk about next week. Okay, so that's the monarchy. It splits into the northern and southern kingdoms, and the Bible in 1st and 2nd Kings rates all kings of the northern and southern kingdom as either good or bad. And the kings, all 19 kings of the northern kingdom are rated bad. That's because they don't worship at Jerusalem, which is in another country. And of the 20 kings of the southern kingdom, 8 are rated good and 12 are rated bad. So there it's more of a mixture. There's a large amount of corroboration, a lot of references to Egypt or Babylonia or Assyria or whatever, consistent with the historical record. Historical accuracy is high. Those are the 15 prophets. What message did the prophets focus on? The Sinai covenant, that's the 10 commandments. They condemned both the northern and southern kingdoms for disobedience, the need for repentance, the hope for forgiveness, and this talk about the anointed one. An anointed one in Hebrew is Mesha or Messiah, and in Greek it's Christos. So when we say Jesus Christ, we mean Jesus, the anointed one. And in other words, Christ is not his last name. It's his title. Okay, nation state of ancient Israel was in a tough neighborhood, surrounded by huge and powerful empires that rose and fell. And we're going to see how the Neo-Assyrian Empire rises and falls, and then the Neo-Babylonian Empire rises and falls, and then the Persian Empire rises and falls. And that's going to be very tough for Israel. In fact, after the Persian Empire, it's going to be the Greek Empire under Alexander rises and falls, and ultimately the Roman Empire rises and lasts a long time, actually. Okay, so there's the location. of Israel, the red dot. And Egypt is down there. But here's the three main ones. Assyria, you can see where Assyria is located. They're going to conquer everything. And then after them, Babylonia is going to conquer everything. And then after them, Persia is going to conquer, under Cyrus the Great, is going to conquer everything. So these three empires, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Neo-Babylonian, and the Persian, are about to change the entire history of the world by pushing writing and activate the writing prophets to write. This is why writing becomes so important, and we're going to be talking about that a lot. So we have the four periods: the prehistoric, the monarchy, which is the one we're in, the map, the split of the northern and southern kingdoms, and we have the unified monarchy, which is considered good, the northern kingdom threatened by the Neo-Assyrian Empire and eventually conquered, the southern kingdom threatened by the Neo-Babylonian and conquered, the Babylonian Exile. That's going to be our storyline. So the northern kingdom meets the Neo-Assyrian Empire and gets wiped off the map. Here is Tiglath-Pileser III, the emperor from 745 to 727. He sets out to conquer the whole world and impose writing. Writing in the language called Aramaic. And he does that. Aramaic is not even the Assyrian language, but it's something that they do, and they put up big monuments all over the place saying, "I am the king of the whole world," right? Now you can imagine people's reaction to that, especially the Israelites. But, and then he's followed by King Sargon II from 722 to 705. And he deliberately, I think the other one did, pushes the Aramaic language as a tool of conquest, as a way to get everybody unified so they can administer the empire, through their delegated people, their governors they send out. And then all four Israelite writing prophets react to this Neo-Assyrian Empire threat. Amos, about 750, Hosea, about 745, Micah, about 727, and the first part of Isaiah, between 747 and 700. Now, what do I mean when I say they react? They are going to each prophesy, and we're going to tell for each prophet what they're prophesying, okay, and what the results are. So the Assyrian era prophets will interpret the Neo-Assyrian threat to the northern kingdom as Yahweh punishing the northern kingdom for their sins and immorality. That's going to be what all of those four prophets say. Prophets such as Amos are very well informed about not just the Assyrians, but all the other nations around. They are not politically naive. But their concern of the prophets is always about Israel's morality, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Are they treating people right? Are they treating widows and orphans? Are they taking advantage, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer? That's what the prophets are concerned about. Now, a scholar named Klaus Koch has done something very helpful to me, and he divides the writing prophets into the Assyrian era prophets, which we're in now, right? And then later, the Babylonian and Persian era prophets. This, I find, makes it much easier to understand what's going on in the Bible. So this is Klaus Koch, a European German scholar, and the prophets of the Assyrian period. And session 4, that's actually, now it's session 7. But we have readings, you were talking about the readings. And Amos is a prophet, about 750. He lived in the southern kingdom, but preached in the northern kingdom. And here's Amos's message. I'm just quoting a part of it. You cows of Bashan. This is referring to the women and all their finery and their high living. You cows of Bashan, exploiting the poor, crushing the needy, you turn justice to wormwood and cast down righteousness. And here's where he gets really targeted. King Jeroboam II, who is the king of the northern kingdom, shall surely die, and the northern kingdom shall be deported. That's really a tough message, right? And what happens? The northern kingdom is wiped out in 722 and disappears. The Assyrians come in, they conquer it, and their strategy is move people out to Assyria or other places and bring in a whole new set of people. This is because they're worried about revolts, right? Their strategy for avoiding revolts. Okay, Prophet Hosea lived in the northern kingdom and preached in the northern kingdom, points to the same unconditional catastrophe as Amos, that the northern kingdom is going to be punished by Assyria, and the result, they were wiped out in 722 BC. And there's Hosea. We could talk more about that. Hosea was a northern kingdom prophet whose oracles were directed mostly against the sins of the northern kingdom, but he also wrote about the southern. Prophet Micah, he was a social critic of the northern kingdom, and the result was the northern kingdom was wiped out. Micah is especially famous because he's the one who predicted the Messiah would come out of Bethlehem. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, from you shall come forth one to be the ruler of Israel. That's probably his claim to fame. Walk humbly with your God, Micah, that was the famous statement. And then the prophet, first Isaiah, we'll talk about, but he's like 46 years. He proclaimed the downfall of the northern kingdom, and the result, the northern kingdom was wiped off the map by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Now you know why they're called prophets, because they are prophesying disaster because of the sinful conduct, the immoral conduct of the northern kingdom. Let me just take a brief moment to say, okay, well, there's Isaiah. Prophet Isaiah has prophesied in 3 different time periods. They're all part of his book, but chapters 1 to 39 is referred to as first Isaiah because it's about the Assyrians. Chapters 40 to 55 is about the Babylonians, and 56 to 66 is about the Persians. Okay? He prophesies at 3 different time periods, and we're only interested right now in the Assyrian one. So this is a summary of the prophets regarding the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The writing prophets from about 750 to 701 accused the northern kingdom of sinfulness, immoral conduct, and predicted that the northern kingdom would be conquered by the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and it happened. Those writing prophets, Amos, Hosea, Micah, and first Isaiah of the Assyrian period, the fact that they wrote in the Hebrew alphabetic language is very important. This type of writing is new. Now remember, the Assyrian Empire is forcing everybody to use Aramaic, a closely related language. But they are writing in their vernacular to the people of Israel. And the fact that they are writing in the vernacular is itself very important. And the fact that a huge and powerful empire, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, is using a written language, Aramaic, as a deliberate strategy of unifying its empire so they can all talk to each other and they can rule it from Assyria. So we talked about Tiglath-Pileser III, and he set out to conquer the world, including by writing, and Sargon deliberately, he's quoted to this effect, pushes Aramaic language as a tool of conquest. And that gets everybody interested in the alphabetic languages of Aramaic and Hebrew. Now, this is all happening up in the northern kingdom, but it's going to have an effect on the southern kingdom, which is not conquered by Assyria. Tries and they fail. But why don't I stop there for just a moment, because there's sort of a turning, then we're going to go on to what happens with the Babylonian Empire. Do you have any questions about the Assyrian era prophets and their predictions and... Okay.
You talk about first is Isaiah, and then there's a second and the third. Well, how long did you write for?
Well, in scholarship about the Bible, scientific scholarship, they recognize that those parts of Isaiah are addressed to different time periods.
Right.
And unless he lived 200 years, it wouldn't be. But what happened with especially the major prophets is they gathered a school of disciples. And so the assumption is that Isaiah had a group of followers, and then at some later point, Isaiah is going to be quiet for 70 years. You'll see that in just a second. Nothing written by Isaiah. And then there is another prophet who is part of that same mindset. And he publishes, and he is included when the Bible is put together as part of Isaiah, because they were not into all of this authorship stuff, okay? They, if you had a school of thought, they were apparently happy to just gather it. Does that help?
Okay. All right.
It's accepted in scholarship because, the next part's going to be talking about Babylonia, which is 70 years later. And then eventually Persia. Does that? Yeah.
So are you saying the book of Isaiah in the Bible was written by more than one?
Three different. It
Okay.
is considered to be written by 3 different authors who share a similar perspective. And it's a very interesting perspective because Isaiah, what's interesting about Isaiah is that Isaiah is very uncompromising about the northern kingdom and the need even for the southern kingdom to disappear. But Isaiah is also fundamentally optimistic. So even first Isaiah talks about the Messiah to come. In other words, even while he's hammering at the northern kingdom, he's offering hope for the future. And then you'll see that after the exile happens, Isaiah changes from being a critic to being a supporter, giving people hope that things will change and be better, which they do under Cyrus the Great. Does that help you? All right. So that's the Assyrians and the 4 Assyrian era prophets. And this is all up in the northern kingdom. But it's affecting the southern kingdom because when Assyria conquers the northern kingdom, they have a policy of resettling. So they moved most of the northern kingdom, the more educated ones, over to Assyria and brought in a whole bunch of people. They did this so there wouldn't be rebellions. But the result was that a lot of people from the northern kingdom immigrated south into the southern kingdom, especially into Jerusalem. And so they brought with them all of the manuscripts or whatever they had, and that became the property of the southern kingdom in 722 BC. Okay? Now we're going to talk about what happened to the southern kingdom. But here we go. This is King Hezekiah. I don't know where they found that picture. But 716, remember 722 was when the north was conquered. The southern kingdom was affected because it produces a huge refugee flow into the southern kingdom. And so here we have the sad story, the united monarchy, which was good. Then the northern kingdom, it collapsed in 722 to the Neo-Assyrian Empire and disappeared. And now we're going to look at the southern kingdom. And it's going to find itself attacked by the Babylonian Empire. Prophecy stops for about 70 years. Peaceful Neo-Assyrian rule. In other words, the Neo-Assyrians are ruling the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom is paying tribute to keep them off their neck. Okay, they're paying money to avoid being conquered. But then we have the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Remember, this is a scholar that separates the Assyrian from the Babylonian. And this is his second book, the Babylonian and Persian periods. I just find this extremely helpful, as I said. Okay, the Babylonian Empire, about 626, King Nabopolassar founds the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and he too pushes Aramaic as a language, okay? They're still going to be having everybody speak a common language because it's advantageous. And he's followed by probably the most famous Babylonian, Nebuchadnezzar II. The Great is called the Great. Neo-Babylonian Empire, he ruled from 605 to 562. He conquered the southern kingdom. He destroyed the temple, and he took all the leadership into Babylonian exile. King Nebuchadnezzar. Now I have this is the Babylonian Hanging Gardens, the Ishtar Gate. You see how small the people look there? The Babylonians were great builders, especially Nebuchadnezzar, and that's a ziggurat. So the Neo-Babylonian era writing prophets are Jeremiah, Ezekiel, second part of Isaiah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Joel, Obadiah, and Habakkuk. And I'm going to go through each of these, not taking very much time. And there was also something that happened in this time period, discovery of the written book of Deuteronomy in 621. Remember, the Babylonians are rising in 616. 621, and that book, Deuteronomy, caused a massive revolution in Judaism because Deuteronomy said everything must be centralized in Jerusalem. All the other worship sites had to be thrown out. Destroy all sanctuaries outside. Pilgrimage 3 times a year. This is when they began the pilgrimage festivals. And this is the prophet Jeremiah. He talks about not only the old covenant, but there being a new covenant, which is considered very optimistic, but it's very important to Christianity. And here's his message. There's a boiling water pot from the north. This is his image. A boiling water pot from the north that's going to punish evil in the southern kingdom. And what Jeremiah says to the southern kingdom, your ways have brought Yahweh's wrath upon you. And the result is the Babylonian exile, the conquest of the southern kingdom by Babylon and taking all the leadership out to Babylon. So, in fact, he says, I think I have it next here. Yeah. Okay, prophet Jeremiah. He begins to prepare for the possibility of repentance by the Israelites after they've been conquered. Thus says Yahweh Sabaoth, Yahweh Sabaoth is Yahweh of hosts, Yahweh of armies is the correct translation. And now I give all these lands, the southern kingdom, into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, my servant. In other words, he is viewing Nebuchadnezzar as God's designated agent to crush the southern kingdom for its sinfulness. These are tough prophets, right? You might not want to hear this message if you were in the southern kingdom. Okay, and Habakkuk, the revelation awaits an applied time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false, though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and not delay. Habakkuk is another prophet about the 587 time period. And he says, Yahweh, you have installed Nebuchadnezzar for a just order. He's famous for this other quote, the just shall live by faith, in the New Testament. Anyway, the result is the Babylonian exile. The prophet Obadiah about the day of Yahweh. The day of Yahweh is the day when the whole world gets hurt, and the Babylonian exile, and he's prophesied a day of Yahweh and the Babylonian exile. That's Obadiah. Zephaniah, it's the same basically. Ezekiel ben Buzi, he's probably my favorite, I don't know. Ezekiel has this vision of God's throne, God on his throne, but the throne is on wheels that can go every direction. Because God's throne, as far as Ezekiel is concerned, is now in Babylon. Right? That's what the wheels mean. And he presents Israel's history as a history of guilt. That's Ezekiel, the temple on wheels. And then we get the prophet's second part of Isaiah, about 550 to 540. Here's his message: comfort, comfort my people. Make a highway through the desert. The highway is the one that's going to take people from Babylon back to Judea, to Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple. And he also is famous for his passages about the suffering servant, which of course is very important in Christian theology, about the Messiah being a suffering servant as well as a king. Then we have the Babylonian exile. This is 48 years, where the cream of Israel, the cream of the southern kingdom, is in Babylon. And in fact, the King Jehoiachin, is in Babylon. He's being fed and kept up by the Babylonians because he's not causing them any problems. And he doesn't want to see somebody else. The Babylonians don't want to see anybody else cause problems. So that's the Babylonian captivity. It was a horrifying experience for Judaism. All seemed lost. The temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. But the prophets interpreted that good things were going to come. And according to the prophets, God had a surprise, and that's Cyrus the Great, emperor of Persia, who conquers Babylon and returns the Jewish people from the Babylonian captivity to build the second temple in Jerusalem. And in fact, Cyrus the Great also pursued the policy of using the Aramaic written language to unify his empire, just as the Assyrians and Babylonians had done. And this is Ezra returning to Jerusalem from Babylonian exile. And this is all, the red is the Babylonian exile, so 532 is when they start coming back. With the return of the Jewish exiles to Jerusalem, the Bible's history lesson ended. The Jerusalem temple was rebuilt, and the second temple era began. And so that's the second temple era from 532 to 70 AD. That's what we're going to be talking about next time. And the Second Temple era will last to 70 AD, past the time of Jesus and Paul. So the Judaism that Jesus knew was this Second Temple Judaism we're talking about next time, and the Judaism that Paul knew was Second Temple Judaism. And there's that timeline. Now, there were writing prophets after the Babylonian exile. Third Isaiah. This is a quote: "The Spirit is upon me because Yahweh has anointed me to proclaim to captives a year of release and an opening to them in bondage." They're going to be leaving Babylon and returning to Jerusalem. Prophet Haggai, 520 BC, he's involved in rebuilding the temple. That's Haggai rebuilding Yahweh's temple. Prophet Zechariah in 520 rebuilding the Second Temple, and he has a number of interesting visions. That's Zechariah. Prophet Malachi is famous for, "Behold, I will send my messenger Elijah. He will prepare a way before me." When we hear that John the Baptist was preparing the way for Jesus, that meant that he was in effect Elijah. And when modern day Jews have a celebration of Passover, they always have a cup for Elijah, a cup of Elijah, because they are waiting for the Messiah who will be preceded by Elijah. Oh, and there's Malachi. Why do I place so much emphasis on the writing prophets, the ones who wrote a book, the 15, the 3 major, 12 minor, and on the writing policies of the 3 empires, Neo-Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian, and Persian? Because writing changed everything. Ancient Israel had always been an oral culture. They tell stories. Fathers still tell stories to their children. They're passed on and on. It was not a writing culture. That surprises people, but it was not a writing culture. And the main story of the Jewish people, the Israelites and then later the Jews, was and is the Passover story. The Passover story is the story about being slaves in Egypt and freed by Moses through the Red Sea and the plagues of Egypt. That's the Passover story, and it is read today by Jewish families on Passover. Passover is about the same time as Easter each year. The Passover story is read in the home, and it's read the same way for 3,000 years, I guess. So ancient Israel was an oral culture. The main story is the Passover story, and it was told orally for basically 600 years, from 1208 to 621, until Josiah's discovery of this book of Deuteronomy. What's interesting about Deuteronomy, it's one of those 5 books you were talking about, the Torah, but the first 4 are all oral. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. If you look at the 10 Commandments in Exodus, they are spoken, right? Not written, spoken. In Deuteronomy, they're written, because this is the transition from an oral culture to a written culture. And we know it today as a written culture, right? The Old Testament. But in fact, that was very late. And what's even more important is that the prophets were before the writing. In other words, the prophets and all their talk about morality started the main drive for Judaism, and then the written version, especially Deuteronomy, came later. And that's, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Why were the prophets important? Because they interpreted Israel's history, and in particular, they interpreted the way God intervened in Israel's history. What did the prophets focus on? The Sinai covenant, condemning disobedience, need for repentance, hope for forgiveness, and the anointed one. So here is the prophet's interpretation of history. The Neo-Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom was Yahweh's punishment for its sins. The Neo-Babylonian conquest of the southern kingdom was Yahweh's punishment for its sins. And Cyrus's Persian conquest that ended the Babylonian exile and allowed the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem was Yahweh's decision. It is a powerful vision. And okay, here is the four periods. So we had talked about the prehistoric B4000, monarchy, which we've now finished. And then we're going to get to the Second Temple era. That's next week.